Sweet. Harrison, thanks for coming on.
No worries.
Tell us a little bit about yourself. What do you do? What do you do for a living? Nice car. What do you do for a living?
I'm a pastor of Kingdom Church in St. Albert.
Cool.
And been doing that for 5.5 years.
Sweet. What's sort of the story behind that? Like, what inspired you to, what was your calling towards that? Like, what's the story?
Yeah. So honestly, it was kind of this idea that I just wanted to have a place where I could invite my friends who don't know Jesus. And so kind of the heartbeat behind our church was we wanted to be a place where people who would not normally go to church could come to church and experience Jesus. And so that's kind of been the heartbeat of our church, just a place that you can invite your friends and family that don't know who Jesus is. So that's kind
sweet.
of the DNA of our church.
That's cool. And how long have you been, running the show there?
Yeah, so we started in September of 2018.
Okay.
And I guess actually we started in May of 2018 in our basement, but we officially launched kind of outside of our house in September.
Cool. Jeez. So over the last little bit then, what is some of the challenges you've had to go through and overcome over the last few years, personally as a leader?
As a leader, yeah. I mean, I think because when our church started, obviously, there was a pandemic right around when our church started. So I think probably the biggest leadership lesson, challenge, obstacle has been navigating change. Mm-hmm. And I think, honestly, I'm probably like most people. I don't think I love change per se, but that season I think has just helped us to be ready to go where God calls us to go, ready to change things up. And honestly, not to get married to methods, but just, stay on mission and then realize our methods will change. So I think that, to answer your question, the challenge has just been, how do I adapt as a leader to whatever our current culture or circumstance is?
And how do you adapt?
I think just, assessing, for us, like, context matters. And so we have to figure out, number one, like first and foremost, who has God called us to be. And so I think that it's easy to want to do what everyone else is doing. But I think the lesson for us has been like, hey, who has God called us to be? And then that will navigate or determine at least how we navigate particular changes. So we're going to do things that are relevant to our context, to our culture. And so ultimately, so how do we do that? I think being able to discern God's voice and where he's calling us in particular is kind of first and foremost. And then just being courageous, because change is hard. And I think a part of leadership is going first and navigating the course for everyone else. So I think honestly, if I could say like in one word, how do you do change? I would say courage. It just takes courage to step out.
Yeah, that's good. So obviously, you got a handful of kids, married. So life is busy. Yeah. You took 2 days out of your week to be here. Yeah. Why? What's so important about this, next couple of days that it made sense for you?
I think for me, like just relationship, first and foremost, like coming to this place, like two types of relationships. Number one, like the ones that I already have. Even going back to our last question on change, like, I don't think I'd be able to get through the seasons that we've gone through without the relationships that we have. Obviously Pastor Brett plays a big role in our church. He's one of our elders. And so,
nice.
Just having someone to lean on, in those times of change, but just something like this, these 2 days to glean wisdom from, not just him, but other pastors as well. Like, what have you navigated? What have you been through? So for me, it's all about relationships. Again, the ones we have, and then meeting new people. I've already met people today. I got to meet you today.
Fair enough.
So those are kind of the things that, you can get content anywhere. You can watch videos, but what you can't get anywhere is relationships and meeting new people. So for me, that's probably the biggest thing.
That's huge. Yeah, that's sweet. Do you find more often than not, you don't have a lot of community, or maybe you do? I don't know. Like, cause I've heard mixed sort of feedback from different leaders where there's not a lot of community and a lot of isolation where they're at, or there is a lot of community. What's been your experience with that? Yeah.
I think that like within church, we definitely have community. But I would say like as the senior leader, and I think a lot of other senior leaders can attest, there is a level of loneliness because in your context or in our context, your relationships can only go to a certain level because of the position that you hold. Yeah. And so I think there's like within like all leadership, but just the higher that you go, I think at times there's an inherent sense of loneliness in that, which again is why like things like this are so important, because you're coming into contact with other leaders who know what that feels like. And I mean, to be frank, like you can talk about the people at your church to each other,
Right.
in a way, and not in like a gossiping way, but like, hey, I'm navigating this issue. How have you navigated this issue?
Yeah.
Or I'm feeling certain things. Like how do you navigate these things? So I'm not sure if that answers your question exactly. So I would say, obviously, you know, as a leader, like we have great friendships in our church, and I would encourage you need to have friendships in your church and people that you love and care for. But in leadership, there's also, I think, just a blessing of having community and friendship outside of your own church. And that's where something like this is so valuable.
That's sweet. What would you say would be some of the more common challenges you've seen a lot of leaders, and maybe yourself, have just in general within sort of the church space that you find a lot of leaders maybe struggle with?
Gosh, it just depends on the season.
Yeah, for sure. Sure. Yeah, fair enough.
Because every season is different. Every season has challenges.
Yeah.
I think that I would just find that, like, for me, the biggest challenge is always probably just the mental challenge of like discouragement. As a church plant, you know, we've been blessed to have seasons of growth. And then we've, you know, been, I would still say blessed to have seasons where things aren't going the way you want them to go. But what I've found, at least for me, in the seasons of growth and in the seasons of maybe you're stalled, it's actually both the same challenge. It's a challenge of discouragement. As you're growing, the discouragement is like, do I have what it takes? Is there a strategy? Am I the leader to take us to the next place? And so it's that mental battle. And then in seasons where you're stalled, it's the same battle.
Yeah.
Right? Am I the leader to take us there? Like, is there something I'm doing? So I can't speak for everyone. And again, ask me a different month and I might have a different biggest challenge. But probably that's the first thing that comes to my mind, is that mental battle of that we fight. Right. And we wrestle not against flesh and blood. Right. Yeah. So I think that there is that like spiritual level of like, hey, there's an enemy that is seeking to discourage. Because you know, there's that text, the gates of hell shall not prevail against, you know, the church of Jesus Christ. And I think that we know that the enemy won't win, but he doesn't give up. Right. And so I've just found, you know, one of the things that, at least in my leadership, is that that's this discouragement is the tool that he uses. So yeah, if I thought longer, I could probably give you some more answers. But
yeah. I mean, that's like a 3-hour conversation. Yeah. So sort of wrap this up, because we've actually like hit our time already. Last question. And I ask this question to everyone, you know, I do podcasts or interviews with. What is the worst piece of advice you've received around leadership?
I think that, okay, so I'll preface by saying that I think this is actually good advice. But there's a level of bad advice in it as well. So the advice in general, I think, is this idea that, like, in specific to the church, like, your church will rise and fall based on your leadership. Now, I think why I think that's good advice is that I think that God calls people and God calls us as leaders to build, to rally the troops, to hear from God, all those things. And so there's a level of good advice in it. But why it's, I think, also some of the worst advice is that at the end of the day, we plant seeds, but God makes things grow. Right.
That's
and so
good.
I think that I've just found that, like, I've used that advice to encourage myself, but then at times it can be discouraging, because then it's like, well, is this thing not going because of me? Or if it's growing, is this because of me? And I would just say that I need to remind myself that, no, God is the one that makes things go, and God's the one that makes things grow. Our calling is just to be faithful. And when we're faithful and we do what we can do, God can do what he can do. So yeah, that's top of my head.
That was really good.
Yeah,
that's huge. Dude, thanks so much, man.
Yeah,
Appreciate
thank you.
It's Pastors Gathering 2024. Be great, stay blessed. Adios.